Good morning, and welcome to the first session of the last day of the conference. So thank you so much for joining. Let me begin with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respects to the elders of the Nguyen people, past, present, and emerging. It's my pleasure to chair this panel of 4 distinguished authors, actually 5, we have 2 joint presenters, who have all written about civic space in Asia. This year we've seen civic activism across Asia, challenging norms and status quos, using technology and digital space in new ways and important ways. We've also seen growing pressure to limit civic engagement and increasing restrictions for how civil society and media organizations operate in different contexts. During this session, we'll hear from 4 authors who are examining what it's like to work in contested civic space through angles that look at human rights in Southeast Asia, public service media, land dispossession in Cambodia, and working under authoritarian restrictions in Vietnam. We'll hear from each presenter, and then we'll use the final 20 or 30 minutes for questions and answers to any one of these speakers. So please note down your questions as they come up. I'll introduce our speakers and then hand it over to Bao to start us off. So we have Dr. Bao, an economist at International Rice Research Institute, who will be speaking on resilience under pressure, how CSO and INGOs in Vietnam adapt to authoritarian restrictions and aid cuts. Then our second speaker will be Leanne Smith, the Chief Executive of the Australian Human Rights Commission, speaking on quiet partnerships, lasting change, technical cooperation on human rights in Southeast Asia. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Prashanth Pillay, Manager for Research and Evaluation, and Joe Elsom, the Head of ABC International Development, speaking on public service media as a regional anchor for public interest values. Finally, we'll hear from Leanne, a PhD candidate here in the Department of Political and Social Change, and he'll be speaking on capitalism, political agency, and strategic adaptation for political survival in land dispossession in Cambodia. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all of these speakers, and we'll kick it off with our online presenter. So please, Dr. Bao, we're happy to hear from you.
I will start my presentations. So today I'm going to share findings from my research titled Resilience Under Pressures, which examine how civil society organizations, particularly Vietnamese NGOs, community-based organizations, and dissident groups and international NGO navigate the increasingly restricted civic environment in Vietnam. And I'm Bao. I'm working at the researchers at International Rights Research Institute. So to situate this work, let's start with the global and national context. Globally, democratic backsliding has becoming increasing common, with closing civic space observed in many countries, especially numerous authoritarian and hybrid regimes. And Vietnam reflects this trend. Although the country has long maintained a tightly managed civic sphere, the period after 2016 marked a renewed contraction of space for independent organizations, and the stage increased monitoring of external linkage, tightened rules surrounding foreign funding, and heightened scrutiny of organizations working on governance, environment, or rights-related topics. These developments, combined with a more assertive security apparatus, create a challenging environment in which CSOs must constantly negotiate their ability to operate. The key puzzles motivating this studies is the uneven yet patterned ways in which CSOs experience and respond to repressions. In Vietnam, different types of CSO vary widely in terms of legal status, visibility, and the degree to which they are perceived as a political threatening. One might expect this group to pursue entirely different strategies. However, the data show that they often converge on similar topics of survival when civic space construct. This raises important theoretical questions about how authoritarians pressure reshapes organizational behaviors across the entire civic ecosystem, not only among oppositions-oriented or rights-based groups. Understanding these conversions alongside areas of divergence is essential to explaining how civil society persists under authoritarian resilience. The this this research is structured around three core questions. So first, how do CSOs and INGO adapt when authoritarian restriction identify? Second, which adaptive strategies are shared across different types of civil society actors? And third, which strategies diverge depending on an organization's legal status, level of state recognition, and perceived political threat. So this study contribute in three main ways. The first is move beyond the common focus on rights-based or oppositional NGO by comparing four types of civil society actors, including Vietnamese NGO, community-based organizations, dissident groups, and international NGO. And second is highlight a dynamic of convergence and divergence. While many adaptive logic are shared, organization structural position shape distinct pathway of transformations. And finally, the study challenged assumption that the civil society either resists or collapsed under authoritarian pressures. Instead, we see nuanced form of accommodation, reframing, and organizational reinvention. So about histories of civil society in Vietnam. So before 1986, association life were mainly restricted and limited mostly to state-organized mass organizations. And from the early 1990s through 2016, market reform and global integration facilitated the emergence of new NGO and grassroots initiatives, which produced what many interviewees describe as a thousand-flower blossoming periods. Despite ongoing constraints, this era supported growing diversity in civic activities. However, after 2016, political priorities shifted towards consolidations and regime securities. And by 2020, new regulation and political pressure significantly reduced operational freedom. So in the most recent periods, several mechanisms have increased in space. The closures of civic space. This includes stricter policies of foreign funding and institutionalization of digital surveillance. And these pressures affect not only political actors, but also dependent-oriented and communities-based organizations, which now face greater scrutiny and reduced operational certainties. There are many regulations, and recent regulations have significantly complicated administrative procedures, adding multiple layers of approval and oversight that slow down or abstract project implementations, and many CSO or INGO notice that these rules create an burdensome operating environment where procedures uh, alone can threaten organization survival. There's so many challenges identified by CSOs, and across interview, several challenges emerge consistently. First, funding shortage has becoming acute because due to delay approval and donors hesitancy, administrative burden have uh, increased significantly, and emotional burnout is widespread, and staff experience exhaustion from constant self censorship. And as one respondent put it, we don't just face legal obstacle, we face an entire atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. And this climate shape both daily operation and long-term planning. So in our study, we conduct interviews, both offline and online interview with different type of and civic organization, including Vietnamese NGO, community-based organization, democratic group, and international NGO. So the one of the most important finding is the convergence of adaptive logics across all type of organizations. Despite operating in different legal and political spaces, each group prioritize staying safe, maintaining minimal operation, and avoiding activities that draw unnecessary attentions. And many organizations scale back program ambition, shifting to lower visibility format and adopt conservative administrative practice. NGO, Vietnamese NGO noticed that the moment you grow too fast, the state sees you, and that is dangerous. So this conversions reflect the reality that once civic space closed, repression does not target only high threat groups. It reverberates across entire ecosystem. A key share adaptation is a strategic reframing. So organization increasing avoid sensitive terms such as right or advocacy, instead adopting technical and developmental language that align with the stage priorities. A second shared strategy is tactical minimizations, which reduce visibility both online and offline. Many organizations have stopped posting updates on Facebook or have reduced their digital presence due to their presence, and dissident organization adopt micro cell structure and rely mainly on encrypted communications. So several interviews mentioned that activities are now intentionally kept small and quiet and localized, because even innocuous event can attract security. These minimizations reflect both risk aversions and shifting assessment of what is operational feasible under current conditions. And partnership strategies have also shifted across organizations type. And for example, Vietnamese NGO deepen collaboration with the ministries and provincial authority, while community-based organizations increasingly rely on informal partners such as university and INGO align more tightly with government language and prioritize to secure project approval. And across all cases, this partnership function as a partnership function as a vital mechanism for survival. So despite the convergence in some strategies, organizations differ significantly in how transparent they can afford to be. For example, Vietnamese NGO often adopt maximum transparency, publishing detailed budgets, donor list, activity report to avoid suspicion from the state agency and meet donors' requirements. And dissident group maintain secret as a necessity. They avoid publishing reporting entire to protect their members. Another distinct adaptation is the shifting of organizational identities. Many Vietnamese NGO have registered as a social enterprises or consultancy firm, which allow them to continue their work with greater flexibility and this identity transformation are not simply admin changes; they reflect deeper recalibrations of how organizations perceive their role within an increasing conscious civic environment. And for dissident groups, exile has become a central adaptation strategy, and many activists have relocated abroad to escape arrest or harassment. For INGO also face unique set of constraints, and many describe long delay in approval process and strict requirements, and these constraints force INGO to operate with cautions, and which limit their ability to engage in broader advocacy. And about CSO respond to pressure by working at a local level, and the activity ranging from community cleanup or to reading clubs, for example, remains more quiet and communities driven. And this reflects both limited resources and strategic understanding that in the current political environment, a small-scale engagement is the safest path to maintain the operations. And the emotional dimension of adaptation is significant, and all across groups, volunteer and staff report fear of surveillance, uncertainty about organization futures. Foreign donors increasing avoid Vietnam because of regulations, and INGO redirect resources to other countries where operational risks are lower. And as funding dry up, organizations struggle to retain staff or sustain long-term program. The combined pressure of regulation, fear, and resources scarcities contribute to fragmentations within the civic sectors. And to conclude, this study demonstrates that legal status and perceived threat shape distinct adaptive strategies, but authoritarian restriction also generates shared pressures that leads to conversions across CSO organization, CSO type. And civil society does not disappear under repressions. Instead, it's transformed through reframing, minimization, and even exile. And thank you very much for your listening. That's it for my presentation.
I'm sure a lot of people can identify with some of those strategies that you've brought up, and I think it's important. I don't know what this is. Important to put those strategies out there for other people to see how civil society organizations are responding to this increasing restrictions. Also important to keep in mind the long-term context of this, that there are moments where things get restrictive and people transform. I love that language you added about transformation, and then perhaps there'll be a moment where we come back out of this moment of restricted space. But let me pass this on to Leanne, who's going to speak about a human rights angle on civic space.
Great, thank you. So yeah, this is the topic that I'm going to speak on. But before I do, I also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge that we're on the land of traditional owners and welcome any First Nations people with us here today. I think this panel is about closing civic space, and I think in this country, although most of us here are focused on what's happening in other people's countries, we've always got to remember that civic space here is important as well. Some of you may have heard this week that a council in southern New South Wales in the Riverina decided to stop doing acknowledgements of country and stop showing the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags to maintain civic neutrality. I don't think that's the kind of neutrality we're talking about in the context that we work in, but it's really important, I think, that we keep standing up for that space and stay committed to reconciling our nation. So thank you for bearing with me on that. It's really great to be here on behalf of the Australian Human Rights Commission. I haven't been here in this capacity ever, and I don't know the last time the Human Rights Commission was here. As you'd expect, most of the work we do is domestically focused. Our job is to make sure that Australia implements its international human rights obligations. But another part of our mandate is to work with the UN and to work with other national human rights institutions to support human rights globally. So what I'm talking about today is part of our global work. Val, if you're still there, I just wanted to thank you for your presentation, and it makes a lot of sense that you went first today, because you've really laid the groundwork for a lot of what I wanted to talk about in terms of the challenges we face working in this space and working in Vietnam. So thank you for that and for presenting so clearly on what some of the challenges are. I wanted to focus on something that you'd all probably be familiar with, which is how do you advance human rights in the context of these kind of closing spaces where even using the language of rights, as Bao said, can be risky. We know from Civicus Monitor ratings that most Southeast Asian countries are rated as either obstructed or restricted in terms of civic space, meaning that the space for civil society, independent media and peaceful protest is significantly limited. So what this means for human rights advocates is often that human rights defenders face legal harassment, arrest and physical threat. International engagement on sensitive issues can trigger nationalist backlash for local human rights activists, or be used by government to justify crackdowns on them. Civil society organisations struggle with precarious funding, and even discussing certain rights can be perceived as foreign interference and used against local defenders as well. So this is the daily context of the work we're doing in Southeast Asia. Human rights is always one of the most sensitive issues to engage on internationally, particularly in authoritarian regimes, because what human rights protection is ultimately about is changing the power balance, and that's never easy. So today I wanted to share a bit about our experience, hopefully give you some positive sense that change is possible in this context, but it requires a particular kind of approach. Having realistic expectations and setting realistic expectations, and having a commitment to local leadership rather than trying to impose change from the outside. got to remember to keep the slides going. So why do human rights matter in the context that all of you work in, and us too? There's a lot of research and evidence out there that human rights in a development context is important, because when you ignore human rights, you undermine development, sustainability and stability. Inclusive growth is more durable growth. Rights-based approaches prevent corruption because it's about accountability and access to remedy. And human rights violations are often linked to or part of the cause for instability and conflict. We know that peace without justice is rarely sustainable, and peace processes that aren't inclusive are also not sustainable or effective. In the UN system, we've learned a lot, and I say that as a former UNer, to understand that making human rights real requires close institutional collaboration across the UN ecosystem. So the UN Office for Human Rights works in partnership with its development, humanitarian, peacekeeping and refugee sister agencies to ensure that human rights are mainstreamed across all UN programming. It's also important that we keep in mind the connection between the SDGs and human rights. The SDGs and human rights are really two sides of the same coin, if you think about it. The 2030 Agenda's central promise is to leave no one behind, and that's fundamentally what human rights is all about. Every SDG has a human rights foundation, and OHCHR have also done some great work to demonstrate the alignment between international human rights treaties and the SDGs. So I wanted to explain a bit about what our approach to technical cooperation looks like. We know that technical cooperation is only one piece of a much bigger pie. What we do doesn't happen in isolation. It sits within a much broader ecosystem of activities that are a combination of political pressure, partnership and support. We think about it as kind of a toolbox approach for which technical cooperation is just one part. So first of all, diagnostic and agenda setting. So thinking of activities that build a shared picture of the problems and the opportunities and help establish legitimacy and pressure for change. If you think about UN mechanisms like the Universal Periodic Review that every country has to go through, some of the UN special procedures, reviews of treaties that member states have signed up to, this is a way to help set the agenda for the change that needs to happen in a country. Then you have in the toolbox diplomacy, dialogue and advocacy. Activities that try to shift the political will and create space for change by building relationships with key decision makers, creating incentives where possible for change and amplifying local voices. Examples of this can include things like bilateral dialogues with governments, multilateral and regional advocacy, civil society reporting and campaigning. So then technical cooperation comes in as another part of the toolbox, and that's about capability building activities that try and translate government's commitments into institutional and technical change. When I talk about technical change, some of the characteristics we focus on in our work is that technical cooperation is often quiet and needs to be sustained. It's often work that's happening behind the scenes. Our goal is to build relationships and trust, not to embarrass or isolate governments. It's peer-to-peer, so it's often in the form of learning exchanges between professionals and partners. It's often about linking institutions that have similar responsibilities to be able to share experiences and learn together. It has to be politically aware. It requires constant awareness of the political environment and careful judgment about what is possible and when. We work through an ongoing process of political economic analysis, and we work closely with the political teams of the DFAT posts where we work to share and maintain political awareness. I just wanted to share some examples of the work we do. I mentioned peer exchange, education. We also do training, institutional strengthening. A couple of case studies. We work with ASEAN's Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, which is a focus area for ASEAN around human rights. We've been doing work with them over years and years, and through that we've been invited in to the governments that have formed part of AICHA to help them develop their new 5-year work plan. This has allowed us to encourage them to have an evaluation of their previous work plans, and it's also enabled us to bring civil society into the design of the new work plan, which is a significant move forward with ASEAN. Another example is in Laos, where we work. After many years of interacting with the National Political Academy in Laos, we've now been invited to support the redevelopment of their human rights curriculum internally. So we were able to review the curriculum on international human rights, make sure it aligned with global norms, but was also culturally responsive and relevant. We've now worked with the teachers in Napa to incorporate this course into their curriculum, and as a result of that, Napa now has a more accurate, engaging and relevant curriculum that's used to educate government officials from all over government about human rights in Laos. The key success factors in these technical cooperation programs are local institutional knowledge, inclusion, and this is our attempt as a national human rights institution to make sure civil society are included in the work we do with governments. Careful selection of our playing field. So we only work in spaces where there's genuine government commitment and space to work, even if other areas remain sensitive and out of bounds for us. So we're very careful to respect our relationships and maintain those boundaries. And timing. Partnerships like this take years or even decades. It's not about short-term project cycles, because building trust takes time. Let's be realistic. There are a lot of challenges and risks in doing this work. Bao spoke about the political sensitivities. Government relationships are fragile, and we're mindful that if we're shut out, we'll lose all influence, including on issues that we could make progress. So it's a very difficult balance. Political situations can change frequently, so windows of space for human rights progress can depend on particular individuals who may move office or particular policy statements from higher levels. So we have to think about shifting personnel changes and power dynamics. I mentioned earlier the risk of backlash. We walk a line between encouraging change and being mindful of that backlash and the impact we could have. If we push too hard, it can result in international engagement being weaponised as foreign interference and justifying crackdowns. Protection of our partners is crucial. Those we work with can face serious consequences if our involvement is misconstrued. So we always tread carefully and seek guidance from those partners about our public messaging and how we interact. One of the questions we often run into is, when does our work become complicity with a particular government? This is not an easy thing to navigate, and that we know that some governments may invite us, particularly for the optics of working with us. They may want to show donors, the UN or their own populations, that they're making progress. We use some really clear criteria to where we work. We won't undertake technical cooperation on certain areas of rights unless we see that genuine commitment, and we have to be super honest about what's possible and what would be merely cosmetic. We always focus on trying to engage civil society in the work we do with governments and encouraging them to include them if they want to work with us. Time horizons can be really hard with this work, so it can be frustrating when we want to see quick wins, but it is generational work and there are rarely quick wins. So we hope that some of the seeds we plant now will bear fruit later on. It's important that we commit to multi-year partnerships and measure success that's incremental. I'm running out of time, but there are a lot of challenges in our work in terms of measuring the change we're having. Human rights progress is often qualitative, it's hard to measure. For example, in one country we work in, we've been informed by LGBTQIA+ communities that they're receiving better treatment following our training with government officials. How much we claim credit for that is really hard to measure. But we use process indicators as well as outcome indicators. Negative results in this current global context are almost as important as positive ones. Sometimes holding the line is as much as we can do, and that needs to be enough in some cases. So why does it matter, this work? Even in constrained environments, technical cooperation can generate real change. We have been able to see over many years of these programs institutional changes, such as different approaches to human rights training in schools across the country. Individual capacity is built, academics, government officials and civil society, so they're better equipped to protect human rights in their spheres of influence. And sometimes it's just about laying the foundations for future reform. So laying the groundwork for when, hopefully, political space opens up more. The last thing I would say, I suppose, is that our learnings have been that relationships are everything. Somebody said yesterday something really powerful that stuck with me, which is that systems are only as strong as the people who hold them up. We will always put relationships over outcomes because of the nature of this work. We've learnt that we should take a portfolio approach to our work. So working on some less sensitive human rights issues, for example, disability rights can be a lot less sensitive in the context we work in, gives us space to work on some more edgy, difficult human rights issues, and an ability to work between them. Creating space for civil society in our technical cooperation is absolutely crucial, and we won't do it unless we can make sure we bring civil society in a way that they're safe and protected. And local ownership is just non-negotiable now. We let our partners lead on the areas they want to focus on because they're the ones who'll have to sustain it over time. I think I am at time, so I will leave it there and look forward to your questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this also, I appreciate hearing Bao's presentation first. And Leanne, you also highlighted the importance that you place on working with civil society organizations. So thinking about how Bao also mentioned the value of having that international backing. So it really is important to hear that, how important and valuable those relationships are when working on human rights. Let me hand it over to our next presenters, co-presenters, both from ABC International Development.
I'm going to stand up because I just feel better standing up. Thank you very much. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we're on today as well, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. And I pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, their elders past and present. Across our region, independent media are under real strain for a variety of reasons. One of them is disinformation. Disinformation is intensifying. Reuters Institute found in 2024 that more than 60% of Southeast Asian audiences regularly encounter false or misleading information. A UK Foreign Office study found over 85% of surveyed online audiences in Fiji, Solomon Islands and Samoa believe that mis- or disinformation has influenced their views on public issues. Meanwhile, we have authoritarian states scaling up investment in state-aligned broadcasters. Between 2015 and 2024, Russia increased its spending by over 20% and China by over 30%. Comparatively, Australia has had a modest funding increase, while the UK and the US have had cuts. In fact, as you probably know, US public service broadcasters, PBS and NPR, have lost significant funding with the closure of the federal funding intermediary, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So this combination of shrinking independent media and expanding state-backed narratives creates an increasingly contested information environment. And this context makes the ABC's regional role, particularly that of its international development arm that champions media in our region, increasingly crucial. Public service media, at its best, provides trusted, balanced, accessible information that underpins democratic accountability. Recent research by BBC Media Action shows that societies with strong public media score roughly 20% higher in media trust and literacy. Commercial media play an important role in information diversity and pluralism, but really only a credible independent public broadcaster or media can anchor the information system because its motivations is to serve the public interest. This reflects DFAT's international development policy, which prioritises inclusive governance and regional stability. Australia supports locally led media systems that help citizens participate in public life and build social cohesion, contributing to their country's development. A powerful historical example comes from Australia's own Radio Australia. Since 1939, it connected regional communities through war, natural disasters and political transitions, offering trusted information that is free of commercial influence at moments when propaganda flourished. That legacy shows the value of independent public broadcasting, not just to Australia, but to the region and the world. At their best, public service media institutions are cultural institutions. They defend free speech, reliable information, and independent journalism. They create cohesion by ensuring rural communities, marginalised groups, and linguistic minorities see themselves reflected in national conversations. And they build resilience against misinformation by creating a credible, fact-based reference point, and against other threats such as national disasters, pandemics, and civil unrest. There are several examples of strong public service media, such as the Thai BPS, established in 2008 to protect editorial independence, funded through levies insulated from political pressures. It has consistently provided balanced information through cycles of political unrest. It also plays a regional role, partnering with ASEAN initiatives and co-producing programs on issues such as Indo-Pacific stability. It shows how a well-designed public broadcaster can become a national asset and a regional anchor. Other examples include NHK in Japan, Taiwan's public television service, the BBC, Deutsche Welle, and the ABC. With this picture, though, of strong public service media organisations in mind, we're now going to turn to a more cautionary tale, and I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Prashanth.
Poland's national broadcaster, Telewizja Polska, TVP, demonstrates how quickly trust can collapse when independence is compromised. From 1993 to 2015, TVP was a widely trusted public broadcaster, reaching 90% of Polish people weekly. After 2015, new legislation enabled direct government control, and the country's press freedom ranking plunged from 18th to 57th. By 2022, only a quarter of TVP's online users trusted its content. Although reforms are underway, its credibility has yet to fully recover. Our research analyzed over 50 evaluations, progress reports, and supplementary data since 2024, and included interviews with 12 staff members across PNG's national broadcaster, the NBC, and Timor-Leste's Radio de Televisión de Timor-Leste, RTTL. We focused on how ABCID's partnerships have strengthened the credibility and citizen-focused role of these two public broadcasters. More specifically, we wanted to understand how ABCID's contributions at a programmatic level have shaped broader dialogue, policy, and practice of public service media in these two countries. Given that these two programs are funded by the Australian government funding, they also underpin Australia's contribution and impact in this space. On to our first case study. PNG's National Broadcasting Corporation, NBC, established in 1973, is central to PNG's national identity, reaching audiences across 22 provincial stations. ABCID's 20-year-long partnership with NBC has supported newsroom leadership, digital transformation, emergency broadcasting, and civil society engagement. Our analysis highlights two major areas of impact. Firstly, reinvigorating provincial journalism, and secondly, strengthening cross-institutional relationships. Provincial journalism ensures that the media do not just reflect urban societies, but builds understandings between urban and rural communities, strengthening cross-institutional relationships between media organizations. Our research showed that this is critical in building self-accountability around content standards in alignment with journalism ethics. Mobile journalism training for NBC's provincial stations has been described by staff as transformational. Mobile journalism is the practice of gathering, producing, and sharing news using mobile phones to create fast, flexible, and high-quality storytelling anywhere. The training enabled rural reporters to tell local stories using tools they previously lacked. NBC's website analytics show a 20% increase in provincial reach. That equates to over 500,000 new online users. Our internal evaluations confirm that mobile journalism kits enabled real-time and responsive reporting in remote locations, such as during the 2024 Enga landslide. Now, these gains have been reinforced by improved newsroom workflows, including an enhanced website and content quality control, helping NBC operate as a more audience-centered broadcaster. Our audience research found NBC is the most trusted mainstream platform in provincial PNG. One participant captured it powerfully in our raw data. Seeing and hearing more news from my community creates this special bond. I can't quite describe it, but it's reassuring. It's the voice that boldly speaks for us, even when everything around us is unstable. Like the economy and politics, NBC speaks to me. It understands my struggle. It's that guiding hand. That sentiment reflects the value of public service media. You see, when people see and hear themselves accurately represented, trust deepens and communities feel more connected, especially in periods of uncertainty. NBC's credibility also stems from its industry partnerships. With support from MDI, NBC worked with the Media Council of PNG to launch the 2024 Code of Ethics and Professional Practice, the first in more than a decade. This re-established industry self-regulation and positioned NBC as a leader in editorial integrity. The Media Council, supported by ABCID, also played a critical role in consultations around the National Media Development Policy, ultimately endorsed in November 2024. This created a clearer enabling environment for media freedom and independence. A recent example of regional collaboration is the ABC-NBC co-production of the 50th Independence Anniversary documentary. Staff said it lifted the ceiling in production quality and sparked new partnerships between NBC and broadcasters in Tonga, Fiji, and Solomon Islands. Together, NBC and ABC amplify each other as the region's most significant public service broadcasters. Oops. Just quickly for our second case study, RTTL, as some of you might know, is Timor-Leste's national public broadcaster and was established just after Timor-Leste's independence in 2002. Now, it operates in a media environment shaped by limited resources and political pressures. Through the Timor-Leste Media Development Program, ABCID is focused on technical upskilling, editorial standards, and institutional strengthening, at a time when Timor-Leste prepares for ASEAN membership and expands its digital connectivity. Our analysis highlighted three impact areas: on technical skills, collaborative workflows, and a shift towards more community-centered journalism. Our longitudinal interviews with RTTL staff reaffirm an increasing commitment towards objective public interest reporting practices and standards amidst prevailing political pressures. RTTL described how ABC mentoring and staff placements in newsrooms boosted confidence and multi-platform production skills. The introduction of RTTL's first English language news bulletin in 2024 with ABCID support was important to Timor-Leste's government for increasing English literacy skills in the country, given its desire for ASEAN membership. As you know, English is the lingua franca of ASEAN. Industry peers now describe RTTL as the mirror of the nation, reflecting how capacity building can translate into institutional credibility. RTTL noted a gradual increase in audience trust and a deepening of regional conversations about credible reporting, especially between Timorese, Indonesian, and Pacific media. RTTL's evolution shows how improving journalistic practice can shape connection and solidarity beyond national borders. RTTL's journalism now directly informs national debate. Staff reported that members of parliament frequently cite RTTL reporting during sessions, demonstrating influence on policy and public dialogue. In a context where political rivalry can fuel misinformation and vice versa, RTTL provides a stabilizing voice within the community. Timor-Leste's history of fighting for independence is still a vivid memory in the country, and the media's role in documenting the story is also remembered as significant. Just pass it to my colleague Joe to wrap up for us.
Thanks, Prashanth. I'm just going to wrap up with some conclusions. I think that we can see that Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste are clearly very different markets, yet both illustrate how locally led support of the media can deepen trust. Sustained mentoring, support for the development of provincial reporting and capacity building have enabled both RTTL and MBC to embed their vital roles in societies. When integrity and diversity of voices are prioritised, public service media then becomes vital cultural institutions that underpin their national resilience. Both case studies show how public service media connect citizens and decision makers and uphold democratic processes through trusted information. MBC's regional collaborations and RTTL's growing visibility within ASEAN show how influence can extend beyond national boundaries. Our partnerships with them both are long and deep, demonstrating that strengthening credible independent media goes beyond producing just good content or storytelling. It has a deeper, more complex value in society. It's about building stability, trust, and inclusive governance across our region. And it's about sharing values. I guess I'd like to just end by saying that investing in public service media is in both Australia's national interests and our regional interests. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to both of the presenters. I think, again, highlighting the value of trust. And what was interesting to me in this presentation was it's not just trust of media, but how that trust expands beyond across country borders, but also when you trust the media, that it builds trust with your government as well. So I think really important to think about that in contested spaces. So we'll now move on to our final paper presentation for this morning. We have Len Ang, who's going to talk about some research from Cambodia.
Hello. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Let me bring your attention from Australia Human Rights Commission, other presenters illustrating in Vietnam, PNG, and then Timor-Leste to Cambodia context. Yeah. So today I'm going to talk about political agency and strategic adaptation for political survival in the context of land disposition in Cambodia. So let me illustrate about the context of my focus. So as you may have known that large large-scale Chinese investment project in Cambodia increased incrementally between 2007 and 2022. These projects primarily focus on three main sectors. First, energy production. Second, infrastructure. And third, agricultural development. In terms of ownership and institutional arrangements, they can be categorized into three types. The first type is Chinese investment joint venture with the ruling CPP, or what we call local tycoon. Second types of investment project we call structurally institutionalized joint kind of venture between the ruling CPP and the Beijing. And the third kinds of investment project in Cambodia is kinds of investment project without joint local partner, which is kind of Chinese investor alone. So in my study, I choose 3 case studies. So the first one is Haifu Sugar Plantation. So this kind of project that located in northeastern part of the country. The project affect 9 communes. And then the second project is hydropower, Seisan hydropower projects, which affected 4 communes. And then the last one is Darasako Resorts and Entertainment kind of complex. Actually, it impacted 5 communes in India. So why choosing Chinese investment project as a case study, as my case study? Previous study have primarily concentrated the impact of Chinese investment on local livelihoods, environmental degradation, national political transformation, and authoritarian durability. Within this context, it becomes particularly significant to examine Cambodia elected local council kind of strategic actions in these large-scale investment projects. So the centrality of my research project is elected local councils. As you can see that they are under immense pressure to actually implement the Chinese investment projects. Their role is actually to mediate and facilitate between the central and the affected local communities. However, from the empirical finding, it shows that the elected local council in Cambodia consult, coerced, and acquiesce in response to the state-led policy in land disposition for Chinese investment project. Such actions can be explained as strategic adaptation for political survival, drawing on Mingdol framework of strong society and weak states. Local actors, including village leader, business elite, religious network, and patronage network, can strategically resist, reshape, obstruct state policy when they possess sufficient power within the state apparatus. Conversely, as Scott highlighted in his framework, Weapon of the Weak, weak states often strategically adapt policy or enforcement policy practice to mitigate open conflicts in response to significant local resistance for political survival. Cambodia elected local council occupy a relatively weak position within the government apparatus. Following the decentralization in 2002, as you may know, that Cambodia after the civil war, we have large donors coming in from Western countries like EU, Australia, and the US itself to reform the Cambodia. And especially we come to the 2002 decentralization reforms. These councils underwent a significant transformation, transitioning from appointed body to institution directly elected by the constituents. This shift has fostered more constructive relation between local council and the citizen, as well as between local and central government authority. Nevertheless, the elected local council remains subject to central control oversight by the central government, which constrained their physical autonomy and limited their control over resources. Situating this kind of debate within the three questions, whether what make Cambodia elected local councils strategically kind of adapt to ensure political survival when they position themselves in a very weak state apparatus. How does such strategic adaptation for political survival affect relation between local council, the central, the community? Does this adaptation strengthen or undermine authoritarian development in Cambodia? So I will answer the first question due to time constraint, but then more detail in the first question, but then second and third question will be just very brief. Situating my study in the debate, in the broader debate on resistance, mainly in line with the institutional change, in the political economy of land dispositions, we can see three actors engaged in strategic adaptation for their political survival. In this context, scholars in various regions, especially in China, in Myanmar, and Laos, noted that actors like state actor, patient, and local authority adapted strategically in their resistance to land disposition. For the central state actor, they calibrate their strategy to resist local contestation over land disposition, deploying coercive policy, legal rationalization, and policy manipulation to facilitate the resettlement of affected community. Much of justification for land disposition is framed as a defense of national interests, namely promoting local economic development, expanding rural employment opportunity, as well as safeguarding natural resources and environmental protections. In Southeast Asia, in East and Southeast Asia, mainly in China, Myanmar, Laos, likewise, the patients engage in strategic adaptation to resist state policy. They employ a wide repertoire of strategy to safeguard their land, drawing and justifying on narrative of rightful resistance, indigeneity-based claim, assertion of territorial autonomy, concern over legal livelihood and food security, and the defense of cultural and traditional practices. Their resistance to state land disposition manifests in both covert and overt forms, driven by grievance related to inadequate compensation, unjust and confiscation, and other perceived injustice. Relatively little research has been undertaken to examine the role of local authority or local land broker in land disposition. In the context of China, local authority obey the central directives from central government, employing coercive measures and selectively implementing state-led policy to evict affected communities in the pretext of urbanization development project. A growing body of study have examined how local authority implementing state-led policy across Southeast Asia and East Asia. This scholarship demonstrates that local authority obey the central policy, employing coercive measures to enforce this policy to pursue institutional rewards and career advancements. Other study, however, shows that some local authority bend the central policy, deploying coercive measures either to extract personal benefits or alternatively to protect the community interest. The former group tend to exhibit weak or no attachment to local community, whereas the latter maintain strong political connection within the local communities. In Cambodia, from the 3 case study I showed you earlier, local councillors were caught between economic imperative pressure by the central government and local attachment as they decide whether to resist, bend, or obey the central policy. This strategic action have explained why they adopt approach of coercion, consultation, or acquisition in the context of land disposition for Chinese investment project. Party affiliation also play a role, though inconsistently, while the opposition councillors consistently resist the central kind of ruling CPP councillor. So more kind of variation, resisting, bending, or obeying central kind of directive, likely depending on how they weigh the economic impact on themselves and negative effect on their community. Economic imperative encompass a wide range of benefits, including contribution to broader economic growth, compensation package for affected population, the positive and negative impact experienced by the local councils and their respective communities. Local attachment cover the wide range of dimensions of cultural, traditional connectedness, including indigeneity, ethnic identity, a broader context of legal reforms and democratic kind of value embedded within these reform processes. Differential kind of political attachment refer to the diverse kind of party affiliation of local councillors within the local commune system, which shape their political identity and pattern engagement in land dispositions. So just to illustrate, this is kind of the 2x2 kind of matrix that I analyze data from the case study. Cambodia elected local council strategically adapt for political survival in the context of land disposition linked to Chinese investment project in a way that on the one hand resemble forms of resistance and on the other hand parallel everyday resistance within the institutional reform architecture. From the bottom, some local council engage in consultation with affected community and compile their concerns within the parameters of compensation package policy, subsequently conveying this kind of concern to the central authorities. Other local councils invoke the central policy by obey or strategically bend this policy to justify their coercive measure to evict affected communities. By contrast, some other resist the central policy, deploying subtle kind of tactics such as staying behind to support the protester, resign from their position to disengage with the local politics, or deliberately refraining from taking any action that would either support the central or local communities. This type of strategic action was motivated by 3 patterns of factors: economic imperatives, political affiliation, and local community attachments. Let me briefly kind of answer my second question, whether kind of this, strategic adaptation of the local council change the relation between the people and the central. So the way in which local council strategically adapt, whether by resisting, bending, and obeying the state's central policy, produce diverse accounts of action, including coercion, consultation, and acquisition. This adaptive behavior reshape at least short-term relation between the most resistant communities as the constituents and the local council, particularly where coercive measure was deployed to facilitate community resettlement. In contrast, the council that pursued consultative approach appear to experience little disruption in their relation with the local population. Furthermore, the adaptation also alter kind of council relation, which has deteriorated tied with the central, particularly in the area where resistance was strong, as numerous local councillors resigned from the position to resist the central state policy. So this is kind of very brief answer to my third questions. As you can see that various scholars in the region argued that Cambodia authoritarian durability of the ruling Cambodian People Party primarily rely on systematic kind of deployment of threats, force to sexual obedience, suppress opposition party, control and regulate society. We can still see that the elected local council take some kind of pocket resistance, by subtle form of resistance, while other coerce the community to resettlement, to make a resettlement. But that kind of coercion measure is really links to the kind of low intensity of coercive measure. They don't have the ability to deploy security force and other military to actually evacuate the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that final presentation. It's interesting to hear how, when we think about the operating context for civil society, it's also shaped largely by how these local authorities are behaving when they choose to implement policies or maybe bend the policies a bit. Also contributes to how civil society organizations are able to operate in that context in Cambodia. So thank you for that example. Given the time, I have a few questions, but I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions first, and maybe we can take 2 rounds of questions. So please raise your hand if you have some questions.
Sorry, I have a lot of questions, but I'll just stick to one. My question is around the characteristics of technical cooperation that was mentioned by our second presenter, and thank you for the information. I would like to ask, what is your definition of quiet as the very first characteristic of technical cooperation that you've mentioned? Mainly because I am Carolyn from the Governance for Economic Growth program in Samoa. And over the past 2 years of full-on implementation, we've been quietly building relationship and fostering very effective, efficient dialogue between the government of Samoa, as our governance program is very restricted to support at the national level. However, I just want to know where the balance is in terms of quietness, because I go back to the first presentation when I saw the quote, the moment you grow too fast, the state sees you, and that's dangerous. And I would like to hope that that's in the context of civic space and not what we do at the national level, because we're very appreciated by government for the support that we've been provided. And then there's the social media and the need for communication advisor in the different ministries. And those communication advisors are really, and then I refer to the presentation on public service media, where they're really pushing for visibility of the work that they've been doing, the good work that they've been doing. And then through that work by the public service, there is always acknowledgement to the Samoa-Australia partnership. And then, of course, that's loud, because then it comes and it's acknowledging the work that we do. So, and because of the political sensitivity around everything that we do, we try to withdraw ourselves from some spaces where we know it's dangerous to go into. We all know what's happening in Samoa in terms of political instability and whatnot. So, I mean, where do we find the balance in being quiet and being loud? Yeah, that's a great question.
I think there was a question up front. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I get away with 2? One for the media presentations. Thank you for those. I think in the UK, there's been quite a lot of pressure on media support NGOs and BBC Media Action and others, to do what I would call a sort of a real instrumentalization of media for development. So there's been a huge amount of sponsorship of call-in radio shows to achieve gender equity or anti-corruption. So individual programming being very instrumentally driven. And I don't think it's been very successful. And I thought it was really interesting that you were discussing kind of just the construction of public interest media without a very instrumentalized development idea. And I'm wondering, how did you get the space to do that? And have you faced similar pressures to be more instrumental? And then if I can get away with one more, just for the final presentation, you described a kind of variation in the strategies that councillors were adopting. It didn't seem that the variation was across your cases. You had these three quite different types of investment. And I'm wondering whether I picked that up right, and in that sense, whether you're saying that the forms of capitalist investment or the forms of state investment don't make much difference to the political dynamics that you're seeing, that there was a kind of uniformity across the cases. And if that's true, whether that surprised you.
Much. Thank you. Maybe we'll start with these, and then if there are other questions after, we can do a second round of questions. So if I can ask Leanne to start, and then we'll just go in order. We can take the media questions and then the last question to Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. I can feel your frustration. Quiet technical cooperation, I think we have to think about its value in the context of what our overarching objectives and goals are. So I would think about it as part of that toolkit, using a framework of the impact we want to have, the resources we have, and the power we have, the leverage we have, if you know what I mean. My commission, the Australian Human Rights Commission, has a sister organisation in Samoa. It's the Samoan Ombudsman's Office. And they are facing similar challenges in terms of what quiet advocacy or cooperation can achieve. So from my perspective, you've got to do the analysis of the political situation first. And if that points you in the direction of quiet backroom engagement, then that's where you go. But it has a limit on how long you can take that approach. If you're trying the quiet approach and you're not having impact and you can't see any horizon where that impact is coming, you've got to shift gears. And maybe that means turning more to calling on your partners to speak up and speak out for you. Maybe it means drawing on that power and agency you have because of the reputation of your work. You said people value it. Maybe it's time to start saying, hey, if you value it, you need to do A, B, and C. That approach requires a preparedness to walk away. So you have to have that in your mind as a possible outcome if you're going to push a bit harder. But I think it sounds like you do have quite a lot of power and influence, and don't underestimate that. But I wish you all the best, and I know it's a tough struggle.
Thank you for the question on the instrumentalization of programming as well. So I'll speak from a research perspective. That's my sort of sphere and domain. From my experience, our programs and the opportunities they offer and the confines they offer from the design, for us, they are important interfaces to provide support in capacity building. That's how we get our funding. But these activities themselves, and I'm talking more broadly of all the programs that we run, they are premised on a legacy of trusted relationships and shared values that have been built over decades. And they are integral to that sense of mutual trust that we have with partners. So much so that the activities and programs themselves are really, in some ways, peripheral in that sense. They are more or less organically embedded in the work that we do. And I think that it's a core value that we hold true throughout our organization. But I'll let Joe elaborate on that.
Thanks, Prashanth. Yeah, I guess leading on from that, I think there's a number of elements that contribute. And it's not to say we don't have programs that do have specific development objectives or to cover specific thematic areas and have kind of that direction in them. But I guess the way that we try to implement them, there are a number of factors. One is that we are totally locally led. So we will, in a sense, be a bridge between often countries, funders, governments, civil society and media to say, well, hang on a minute, what is it that the local media actually need and want? And we try to centre those conversations around audiences and citizens, because again, it gets to what is the role in providing information or services to citizens, and how can you assist in that? So I think that public interest centred perspective assists us with that, in the sense that that strengthens and enables you to be able to navigate those challenges and to make sure that we're delivering what actually the partners require, and that you can have conversations that can be difficult at times, that's not how we would do things potentially, or it's not how others would do things, but it's absolutely critical to the people, to our partners, that it needs to be done how they will need to do things and how they can operate within their own contexts. And it can be very different. We work with media who are strongly independent, have a lot of media freedom. We work with media who have not a lot at all. So again, it's around trying to find that nexus and how that relates. I think the other kind of unique value that we offer in the region is we are a media organisation. So, and not many other players are in this space. So we ourselves are a broadcaster with an act, Australian government act that requires us to be independent and that requires us to serve, certain values and requirements in that. So again, that independence is our superpower in a sense. It gets us into trouble all the time, but it also means that it protects us and it helps us work as a regional media sector to protect that fundamental value when it is, under threat very often. If that helps answer that question.
Well, thank you so much for the interesting questions. I think your question is also linked to the first sorry, I didn't know your name, but you talk about somehow, right? Kind of, yeah, somewhat, sorry. So that's really links to when you need to be quiet and when you need to be loud, right? So in the context of, how much uniforms the case that I can see across the variation, that's your question. So the kind of resistance context in Cambodia could be, like James Scott, the week, who talk about the week of the weapon of the weak. So he said that covert resistance is much forms of resistance that deploy in authoritarian kind of context, right? You don't need to be overt to be, to resist the central kind of authoritarian regimes or country. So in Cambodia, resisting could take in two kind of different form, like consultations. You use the central state policy to consult with the people, convey these concerns to the central without acting that you are resisting the state. That's what the elected local official cleverly do, right? But then in the other context, they, like staying quiet, they just supporting the protester behind. Okay, you can do whatever you do. I don't have the power to stop you or to what can I say, like to fight back the central. You're the one to do it, So that's kind of a resistance, and I would say that resistance is not just only this contact. It's also resistance from the top, where some elected local official use kind of justification from the central kind of policy to coerce the people to move. They say that this is a central government policy, economic development. Let's say Seychan hydropower project. Cambodia need electricity. Cambodia need to supply the electricity to the central capital. We can't burn. That's what from the quote I remember from the elected official. They said that we can't burn wood to supply the growing kind of investment and population in the city, right? We need electricity. We need dam. We need hydropower dam to supply this kind of electricity. So that's kind of justification is to force the people to move out, right? So this kind of two type of resistance that for taking away the current debate saying that the rightful resistance, which talk about how rural farmer in China resist the central government in land disposition, they justify by using the state legitimate kind of policy to fight back, right? So they don't have any repressive action from the government. That kind of action also can be found in Vietnam, in Laos, and also Myanmar. So that's, interesting that the local people use this kind of legitimate tool to fight back to the central, or maybe to convince the central to, what can I say, because in China, the local authority are the one to force people to move out. So they use this kind of policy to the central, convincing the central that the local authority doesn't play the right kind of direction to evict them. Yeah, thank you.
Let me wrap up. I was hoping we'd get to a second round of questions, but I think we've run out of time. So thank you so much to all of the presenters today, and thank you to Belle, who joined us online, and thank you all for joining the session, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.